reflecting on some of the early feelings that I had, and certainly in the beginning, this overarching feeling of extreme overwhelm. There's so many decisions to make. You found yourself in a world that was completely foreign. For over 95% of families, this would be the first deaf person they've ever met. And when communication's at the core of that, that's so personal and so critical to your connection with your child. So it's completely and utterly overwhelming. Also, deafness is one of those places where you have a spectrum of opinions. You have completely opposite advice being given to you and a sense of judgment that you feel from other people, either in the professional space or community. And so it's extremely overwhelming. Another emotion initially was a deep sense of guilt. I felt like I was a really bad mom for missing that my children were deaf for 3 years, and understanding how significant that would be to their language development. And yeah, for some of us, depending on why your child is deaf, for me, I felt guilty that my genetics were responsible for making them deaf. And in that early stage, I could only see how that would be difficult for them and not necessarily a difference that might be good in other ways. So considering some of the big feelings that we experienced initially, how can we frame them? How can we think about them? How can we let go of hard feelings like guilt? What would you advise?
Sure. So when it comes to working with feelings, it's really important that we can identify and recognize our own emotions. Our feelings are not something that we can control. So it's very important to be able to identify when we are feeling something. That comes from just acknowledging, I have an emotion in me. From there, it's useful to be able to put a label on that emotion or to try and find a name for it. I'm feeling something. What is it I could be feeling? Am I feeling guilty? Am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling angry? To kind of identify and name it and almost take ownership of that emotion. And once we recognize that and can put, hopefully, a bit of a name on that emotion, it helps give it meaning, and then we can ask ourselves some questions about that emotion. Why do I feel that way? You mentioned the word guilt. Okay, I feel guilty. Why do I feel that way? Ask yourself, guilty is something we associate with having done something wrong. Am I doing something wrong? Have I done something wrong? It kind of helps us to process and give rational understanding rather than an irrational emotion. So if we can ask ourselves, okay, I feel guilty. Why am I feeling guilty? Have I done something wrong? Why am I feeling angry? What could be contributing towards that? Just helps us understand where we are, what we're feeling, and that enables us to be able to communicate that. We need to be able to freely, without judgment, have a space to be able to say, I feel frustrated or angry or sad or guilty. And then to be able to ask ourselves those questions to help us understand. And maybe then if we can say, well, actually, I haven't done anything wrong, then you can let go of a guilty emotion. You know, if I haven't done anything wrong, then maybe I don't need to feel guilty. And that's okay. And sometimes we can say, sure, I really do feel angry, and that's okay also. I'm allowed to feel angry. I'm allowed to have all these difficult, different emotions. Let me take some time to really work through them, either on my own, if I feel equipped to, or with the help of support from community, from a professional, from another friend or family member.
I think it's so helpful to give people permission to feel, because a lot of us just in society tend to group emotions into good and bad, and culturally, you know, also. And so you think the bad emotions might be anger or some of the things we've mentioned, and that we shouldn't be feeling them. And so we try not to, but it doesn't help because we do. So I think that's really, really helpful. Some of the other emotions that have, or sometimes still come up for me, are anxiety and fear. And I think anxiety based on a fear that from past experience I've made maybe bad decisions, fear that might link to the future where I might feel like I'm not making any good decisions, but especially about the future. Fear that, I just remember early on just irrational thoughts and feelings before I met other deaf people. I thought, are my kids going to be able to get married one day? Are they going to be independent? Are they going to be able to get work? Are they going to have friends? Are they going to feel loved? Just a whole lot of fears that I definitely can't control, and some crazy fears that are just so far in the future, like are they going to have access to audiology services? Are they going to be able to financially support what I've started? And for a third of families, their children will have other disabilities, and that will have a whole host of fears, which might include worrying about their child outliving them, who's going to look after them, how they're going to be supported. So when it comes to anxiety and fear, what are some of the ways that we can process that in a healthy way?
Sure. I think I just wanted to reiterate on something that you said. When we talk about emotions, we don't talk about good emotions and bad emotions, because there is no such thing. We have difficult emotions and then easier emotions. And difficult emotions are those overwhelming emotions like sadness, as we've talked about, grief, but then anxiety and fear. Sometimes we don't recognize anxiety for what it is. We feel this sense of overwhelm, this pressure, this constant, I can't cope. Some people don't recognize anxiety for what it is. So it's important to know anxiety is a thought about the future. It's usually something that we either can't control or is outside of our control, and it always breeds an emotion of fear. Anxiety is fueled by fear. So sometimes we need to start by recognizing what I'm feeling is anxiety, because it's all about the future, it's stuff I can't control, and it makes me frightened. Being able to work with different emotions starts with that point of acknowledging and recognizing and naming them. There's no shame in saying, I feel frightened, or I'm scared, or this is what I'm worried about. We do have to be able to manage those emotions so that they don't overtake us completely. That also means recognizing this is my present reality. This is currently what I'm coping with. This is the future. These are my thoughts and fears and emotions around the future. And to bring it back to the present, to say, okay, if those are my fears for the future, in the here and now, what can I do and who can help me? Rather than getting stuck in a question of how am I going to make it all work? How is such a paralyzing question, because it means I need to have an answer, when we can almost cancel the word how from our question base and refocus that as what can I do and who can help me. That's more practical, that's more active. We start putting in place a bit of a toolkit, a bit of a support system. So yes, be real about the different emotions, about the different specific fears and anxieties you have for the future, and write those down in a column that is my future fears, and then bring it back to the present. What can I do and who can help me in the here and now, so that I can put a plan in place, or I can possibly start putting provision in place. Fear for the future and anxieties around the future are emotions everybody experiences, whether or not we're faced with a current specific disability, or whether or not we're in the presence of a family member who has a disability and does have specific needs in the future. The future is a place of uncertainty for all of us, regardless of our current reality. And we have to be able to manage our emotions around the future and be honest about those and real, but to be mindful that if we work from a frame of what can I do and who can help me, it can be more manageable in a little bit less of a scary space.
I think one of the things that I've reflected on is how I must have just had a bit of a false sense of certainty for the future, and the space made me more aware of the uncertainty. And so just to reflect that actually nothing changed about the future. It was as uncertain had I not had a deaf child as it is now. There's just maybe a few more variables that feel out of my control. So it's good to think of that in different ways.